Welcome to the Community ROI podcast. Here, senior community experts, founders, and C-level managers tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth about how community impacts business growth. By listening to these conversations, you'll get actionable steps on how to connect community goals with business goals to skyrocket business growth while still bringing extreme value to community members. My name is Yurii. I help people and brands shine through communities and personal connections. And my guest is Seth Resler, a professional who has been building communities long before it became a strategy and who now helps creators, media organizations, event producers, and arts institutions turn audiences into spaces where people connect, participate, and hopefully keep coming back. Of course, keep coming back. And also the host of one of the greatest podcasts, at least from the name side, and also from the perspective, Bad Community Advice. Okay, it's one of the podcasts that Seth hosts, but it's pretty amazing. So yeah, welcome, Seth.
Hi, how are you? Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you so much for coming. I believe that we were running around each other orbits. I saw you in the community world for so long. I checked our the first connection. I remember I sent you this connection request through the CMX community, and it was around 3 or 4 years ago, something like that.
Yeah.
And the craziest part is it's the first time that we actually talk. So
I'm glad we finally did. Thank you for extending the invitation. I appreciate it.
Community world is crazy. Sometimes you see the amazing humans out there. You learn from them. You see some pieces of advice that they share, but you never connect. But finally, I'm super happy that we are here. And once again, let's start with the bad advice. So first of all, bad community advice. Why this name?
Well, I love this, just frankly, because it was contrarian. I had a podcast before this that was called Bad Marketing Advice. And when I was sitting there, thinking about what kind of, podcast could I do? My audience and the people that I work with typically are not people who have the job title of community manager. This is not the folks that you're going to see at CMX or led by community or some of those other things. My clientele, my audience, my customers are folks who, like you said, they're content creators, they're YouTubers, they're podcasters, they're email newsletter writers. I come out of media, so they're media organizations, radio stations, television stations, things like that, who frankly are used to creating content, and that's what they do. And the idea of building community is new to them. I mean, the number one thing that I talk about over and over again is an audience is not a community. And I'm going to be explaining that for the next 15 years, and drawing that out. So this podcast was really designed for people who, it's an introduction to people who are not used to community. And so I wanted to give them advice, but, the way we frame it is it's bad advice, and so I talked to community professionals. You'll recognize a lot of the names. A lot of them are folks that you've had on your show as well. And we asked them, what is the worst advice you've ever gotten? Why doesn't it work? And what should you actually do instead? And so that's the concept behind the Bad Community Advice podcast is, and it's really to take this knowledge from these experts, and bring it to people who are brand new to the community building world.
I like the word advice itself, because if someone asks me for advice, I always tell them I can give you any advice, but will it work for you actually? Because to really give a good advice, you have to ask so many questions. And at the end of the day, it will be not you giving advice, but people are getting to the point themselves by you just guiding them with the right questions. So it's always a very, very tricky thing. And I really loved how you told that community builder is not by title. I had one of the previous conversations with Yurii Lopez, who was building community of freelancers in Microsoft, but he didn't have a title community builder. He created it without being, and I remember I called him community builder, not by title, by heart. And I believe that many people that you are working with, if they are influencers, if they are creators, they already have some kind of people who are coming to them, some kind of people who are talking to them, maybe through social media. Yeah, it can be on Instagram or on YouTube in the comments or whatever, or on Substack, etc. And still, as you've said, it's audience. So what is the main difference, specifically when we are talking about creators? Because many creators still think that they have community. And then they go, what kind of community do you have? Oh yeah, I have a community newsletter for 1,000 participants. But it's not actually a community. So for those creators, what's the main difference between kind of having community on social media and having an actual community?
Yeah, yeah. People want to use that word interchangeably, and I think they do because community sounds softer and nicer, and it sounds friendlier, and so they want to say, "Oh, I have a community," when what they really mean is they have an audience. I mean, the key difference is when you are building an audience, you create content, and if that content's compelling, there will be an audience for it. They will come and they will return. And when you stop creating that content, the audience will stop coming back. You are the engine that drives the whole thing. So when you run out of Game of Thrones books to film, that's it. There's no, you know what I mean? There's no more TV shows to make or whatever. And so you have to constantly do that work. And the key relationship there is the relationship between the content creator and the fan. It's that sort of one-way arrow. I mean, there may be a little bit of back and forth, but not really. It is primarily creator to fan. When you set out to build a community, what you're doing is you are creating a space, and content plays a role in that space, but it doesn't play the same central role that it does when you're building an audience. And that space is I like to think of it more like a container, as opposed to an engine. When you are creating content, you build that container and people show up, and they may initially show up into your space because of the content you're creating, but over time they build relationships with each other, and so they come back over and over again for each other. And I'll give you an example. I would speak at the Podcast Movement Conference for 10 years. And every year I'd go back. And when I first went to that conference, it was because I was new to podcasting. I was learning about podcasting, and I would go to all the sessions and try to absorb all the information. Over time, I was running a podcast. I knew how to, I didn't need to go to a session. How do you choose a microphone or, things like that. But I would still show up. And I would show up and quite honestly not go to the sessions. I was showing up because of the other people that I knew that were there. There were other people in the podcasting space. This was the one place where we all got together, and the one time a year that I would see them, and so I love that. And so that was why I would keep showing up. It was because of community. And so that's how I explain the difference, is that people show up not, just for the content, but they show up for each other in a space. And the key relationship here, when you're building a community, is the relationships that exist between the members, not just the creator to fan relationship.
Yeah, and sometimes it's close to impossible, to have the creator to fan. I immediately reminded the song "Stan" by Eminem, and it was recently a movie "Stan," where we're talking about all the fans of Eminem and how they are happy when they meet him. But then, he have millions and billions of fans. It's just close to impossible to talk to each other, and still you kind of creating the connection of those people, so they have something in common, and then they still have own lives, they have own interests, and they're connected like you are connecting them, and they are still grateful to you for doing this. So that's exactly the value why you keep coming to that conference, because you know everything you want to know, but you keep coming to meet all the friends that you made during the previous meetups, events, or etc. The fun part is that we have a very similar approach with Freelance Unlocked conference that we are hosting for freelancers in Europe. And I always say that the main goal is for each participant to make at least one friend. So the next year you are not coming actually to the conference, but you're coming back to meet a friend. And what you've just shared with me, very, very relies with my personal experience of how it works. And still, when you are a creator, it's kind of easy. Okay, it's not easy. It's hard to create content, but you are creating content. You have something to share. You just talk to your camera and you do this. But there is a difference between talking to the camera and talking to people. So what is one step that creators have to do to create actually a community?
Yeah, so this is why it's so key to understand the difference between building an audience and building a community. It's not just about semantics. It's not just words. They're different, right? I mean, the rules are different. And the rules that work for building an audience, frankly, often don't work when you set out to build a community. And the example that I always like to start with is when you're building an audience, you're just going for size. You want the largest audience possible. When you're building community, that doesn't work. And in fact, it can backfire. Community is about, having the right people in your space. You want the right people in the room, because the key is those relationships between the people. And so you want, when you meet somebody, if I go to a podcast conference and I meet a bunch of people and none of them are podcasters, I'm going to sit there and go, well, what am I doing here? This is this is a waste of my time, and I'm not going to come back to the space. So it's really key to get the right people in the room. I don't belong in a Harley Davidson community because I don't ride a motorcycle. And if I show up to a Harley Davidson meetup, it's just going to get awkward and weird and make people uncomfortable and things like that. So when it comes to community, you want to get the right people in the room, not necessarily the most people in the room. So, it all starts from this understanding that an audience and a community are not the same thing, and that the rules you may have learned to build an audience are not the same as the rules that you use to build a community. And you've got to go learn those community building rules. That's just one example. There's lots of other examples, but I think that's where you start.
I once participated at the community of the Diary of a CEO. So it's like a huge podcast with Stephen Bartlett. And then, I have actually a funny story, because like the 2 months or 3 months before they kind of opened their community, I was like, it would be so amazing for them to have a community. They have such a great impact in the world. And I can imagine to connect all of these people. And then it was a little crazy when I actually joined the community, because people there were so random. So, and I connected with some people from this community. They were interested, but maybe we just randomly clicked. I find them on LinkedIn, we talked, etc. But overall, it was like all types of the people, and I don't actually know if I would like to be a member of this. I'm not a member of this community anymore, because it's just just grabs all my time to be there, to read the comments, and brings me no value. So as a creator, how do you know who's the right person to join your community?
Yeah, that's a good question, and that you're exactly right. It's funny. I remember you posting on social media about this at the time, talking about Stephen Bartlett, because he has been a vocal advocate for community. But then when he set out to do it, I think he kind of went, "Oh, we need to get as many people as possible in this." And I always think there's a line from Jay-Z, grand opening, grand closing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's just, it's not really about getting the most people at your event the first time. It is about starting small, making sure that you understand why people are getting value out of it, why people want to connect with those other people, making sure that, for example, coming to you and saying, hey, I'm thinking about starting this community. Before we go throw a grand opening and try and get 10,000 people there, can I put you in a space on a Zoom call or in a coffee shop with 5 to 10 other people, and I want you to I want to find out if there's value in that for you. If you walk away going, oh my gosh, this was great. I was so happy to have connected with these people because of X, Y, and Z, and I can't wait to do it again. Or do you go, I got nothing in common with these people, and if I never see them again, that's fine. So it starts there. I mean, it really is. And I like events as a starting point. And the reason why I like events is because I view this as experiments. Let's start small. Let's experiment. We got to figure out that why. Why do people come together? Why do they get value out of each other? What is it that is going to make them go, oh my gosh, I can't wait to go back over and over again? And the answer is not in your head as the community organizer. The answer is in your members' heads, and you got to go get it. And, it starts by asking some people, identifying some people who you think are potential members and saying, hey, we're thinking about doing this. What do you think? And then actually testing it, because there's a big difference between what people say and what people do. And so you start with events. And the reason I like events, frankly, is because they end. And so they work really well as experiments, because you can try something, and if it doesn't work, it's over, and then you move on, as opposed to starting with building an online platform where you got to put your stakes pretty firmly in the ground. And once they're there, they're hard to move. If you move it, I always tell people, go run events for 6 months and then worry about the online platform and building that once you're sure that there's a need and you're hearing that back from your members. In terms of whether you start with an online event or an in-person event to build your community, I won't complicate it. It's whatever's easiest. If you're trying to get nuclear physicists and they're all over the world, don't try and get them to fly in and book a hotel and do a whole thing. Just put them on a Zoom call in the beginning. On the other hand, if it's a group of folks who all live near each other, just go to a coffee shop, a public library, a restaurant, somebody's backyard, start there. And it grows slowly. I mean, you know this, it grows slowly. Right? Community moves at the speed of human relationships, because that's what matters. There's no secret sauce to sort of, all of a sudden make it grow really, really quickly. You've got to dial it in and figure it out over time.
It's so fun that you mentioned that, because I remember my very, very first community that I ever created, SEO Club, started exactly because of the event, and not just one. I hosted like 3, 4, or 5 events of SEO experts, and then people who wanted to continue conversations, I added them to the Viber back then, and I was like, and then we switched to Telegram, etc., etc. But it was never about like what will be the platform. It was about like who is interested to come, and then if when you came, would you like to come back again, or maybe even bring your friends. And that's how I grew it to like thousands of people. And then I called it like small community meetups, but every time we had around like 100 people joining. And I was like, oh, nice, good. And everyone found someone to talk to. So, actually the greatest part that at some point there were 80% the same people coming. And they keep coming.
Well, they come over and over again, right? I mean,
exactly.
That's the key. That's how you know it's working. I mean, if you're just getting new people every time, that's a function of your marketing. But if people are coming back, the same people over and over, that shows you that the connection is valuable to them. It is worth their time, and you've got something. That's the community side of it.
A little bit of a personal question: free or paid events?
You could do either. In the beginning, when you're first doing these experiments, you start free, because the point is just this knowledge, right? And you're trying to learn from it. This is another reason that I like events, because events end, because you can do both, right? You can start with, hey, we're going to do free events when it's 4 of us, 5 of us, 10 of us in a coffee shop. But then when we get to the point where it's 200 of us and we're going to a hotel ballroom, I think people understand, okay, yeah, we got to, there's a cost to this now. We've got to pay for this. So, that's one of the nice things about events, not only, in the fact that they end, not only are they great experiments, but they allow you to shift. Whereas on the other hand, if you're, launching an online group, and you're building something out and you start it for free and then you do it for a year and then you tell everybody, all right, guys, now you got to pay for this. What happens? They all get ticked, right? I mean, they're all upset. I used to get this for free. Why do I got to pay for this now? Right. So, I think you can do a little bit of both. I wouldn't necessarily start with paid. I mean, you can. It depends on the circumstances and the type of people that you bring together and the costs involved. But I like events because you can do both. You can start free and then eventually make it paid in a way that isn't going to upset people.
Yeah, I asked it because like every event that I usually do is kind of like a paid event. And recently I tried and made maybe the first and only event for free. And then I was like, why did I do this? I mean, like, they were random people. It was like higher no-show rate. And then not everyone was actually involved. So they just came because, it sounds interesting. Yeah, we'll come, blah, blah, blah. So it was much harder to continue the conversation after the free event. And when I'm talking about a paid event, I'm not saying like thousands and thousands of dollars, whatever. For me, always like paid event is like the cost of 1 or 2 cups of coffee. So basically you just pay not for like, of course, it depends on the level of the event. But overall, you just pay just to ensure that you are interested in this. And then you have like the double value. First of all, you are paying. Yeah, of course, you don't want to lose money. So there is a huge chance that you will show up. And second one, okay. So I paid something. So I actually want to get something for, even if it's like $15, $10, whatever. I want to get something for the money that I invested, because people usually don't care about the investment of their time. It's like they think it's free, but like people, It's not free. No way, it's free.
I think a useful way to think about it is, what is the purpose of the event? And if the purpose of the event is to answer the question for you as the community organizer, is there value here? then I think it makes sense to make it free. But when you get to the point where you know there is value here, and you're confident about it, then I think it makes sense to start charging for it. And exactly for one of the reasons that you say, which is that when people pay, they show up and they participate because they've got skin in the game. And that's one of the ways of getting the right people in the room. I went to I went to a conference. It was run by an entrepreneurial coach. And this conference had hundreds of people here, and this person had a course and a cohort learning program that I found very valuable. I found the content really, really valuable. I was really excited to go to the conference. The conference was free. It was a free add-in, kind of a bonus with the cohort program. And when I showed up to the conference, the number of people there who told me, "Oh yeah, I haven't watched any of the online stuff, and I haven't, I've had the course for years, but I haven't taken it, and I finally just decided I would show up to this conference," and I was ticked, because I thought I was going to be in a room with people who were taking this seriously and were like, "All right, good, let's do it," and I was not. The content of the conference, the things that they put on stage were fine. But the level of other attendees in the room was not, and I wouldn't go back for that reason. And so I do think that's one of the things that charging, and I don't think it's just charging that can do this, but it gets the right people in the room. And that was what we were talking about earlier, is how do you get the right people in the room? I wanted people who were, yeah, I'm serious about this. And I think if there had been an actual, charge for that, maybe there would have been more of those.
You actually made a really good distinction between audience and community, and I feel like you've already get us. If not, go ask Seth more questions. And it's also like before the recording, you told me like creating community as a product, which is like, in my personal experience, is amazing because, I know some companies who have a community as a core part of their product and everything else is like an extra. And for creators, social media is easy. So you create content, you maybe get some ads, you get views, you have reach, you get some sponsors, or you get paid for like putting out the content, whatever your monetization model is. But how to find the business value of community? Like, what is the business value of community as a product for creators?
Yeah, and this comes from the fact that, so my entire career, I've been a creator. I am old enough that when I started my career in content creation, if you wanted to create content and distribute it to the masses, you needed a radio tower, a television studio, a printing press. You needed big, expensive equipment, and you needed a team of professionals who knew how to run this equipment. I knew I wanted to work in radio. I grew up in California. I went to Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island. It's on the other side of the country. And the reason I selected that university was because I toured the radio station. I was like, I'm in. I want to do this because it was a way for me to create content and get it out to the masses. That radio station's gone now. And the reason it's gone now is because you don't need a radio station to create content distributed to the masses. You've got a cell phone and you can record videos and publish them to YouTube, and they can go all over the world. And so the students were like, why would I get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to go be on the radio when I could, just whip out my phone and do that. And so I watched content creation become easier for everybody to do. As the tools became more accessible in terms of price, as distribution became easier. But it also had this other effect, which is that, it's just the law of supply and demand. When there is an excess supply of something, the demand for that thing decreases. And so content is, harder to charge for than it used to be. When we lived in a world, here in America, where there were 3 television networks, 2 newspapers, and, a handful of radio stations in every market, you could charge a premium for that. Now everybody's producing content. And so I've watched the old revenue models fall apart because, the legacy media where I come from, is still trying to charge a premium for content. Everybody's like, just whatever, I'll just go get it somewhere else. I don't, and so the question became, well, what comes after content, right? Now that content is no longer scarce and has become commoditized, how do you generate revenue? And I became really interested in this, frankly, during the pandemic. I started exploring this because that was when I started using virtual event software. I used a platform called Remo, which I still love, and I love. It's been acquired by events.com. And I realized when I hosted my first virtual event, this is different. This is not the same thing as creating a podcast or doing a webinar, or this is about creating a space. And the value here is not necessarily the presentation you give, but in people connecting with each other and talking to each other. And so I started to go down that rabbit hole. Somebody handed me a book. It was called Building Brand Communities by Charles Vogel and Carrie Melissa Jones. I cannot recommend this book enough if you are at the beginning of your community building journey. It's a fantastic place to start. I've gotten an opportunity to work with both of those people. I think they're fantastic. But I started going down that community building role, and I would show up to conferences like CMX. And I was kind of the black sheep. I was I felt like I was the odd man out because, when I'd go to CMX, it felt like it was 90% of the people there, if not more, were from not just the tech industry, but software as a service. They were these community manager professionals who were working for companies like, Canva, for example, those types of companies. And the community started as an outgrowth. Frankly, a lot of them seemed like it came out of customer success, or a way to deflect support tickets. And that was how it was being measured. And I was fascinated by this concept. And I had no interest in working in the software as a service industry. And I became, really enamored with the idea of how do we take these community building principles and apply them to content creation. And because I come from radio, one of the things that I had done was a fair amount of event production over the years, live event production. And that started with concerts. And over time, I've produced conferences or festivals or, talent competitions, all sorts of different. But I started to see the parallels between online communities and in-person communities that were built through events, and frankly, the connection between the two. And so I became really interested in how can content creators build communities, build spaces around their content, and not just build those spaces, but use those spaces as a revenue model. Use them as a way to compensate them for their work and to make money. And it is a fundamentally different revenue model than content creation. It is not the same thing as, hey, I'm going to create content and get an advertiser or get a sponsor or charge a premium subscription if you want the behind the scenes, how we made this sort of conversation of it. It's the value doesn't come from the content. The value comes from those connections that you have with other people, if that makes sense.
Revenue model. So guide me through specific details of where the money comes from. Like, how do you monetize a community as a creator?
Yeah, so first it comes with recognizing where the value comes from, right? And the value comes from those connections with other people. I grew up on a swim team. So I grew up in California, and we had my parents, when I was in third grade, had my sister and I join a swim club. And when we first joined the swim club, what my parents were paying for was access to a swimming pool. We did not have a swimming pool in our backyard, and so this was it. What happened over time is that all our friends and our friendships were based at that swim club. We knew all those people. We were friends. So when it came time to renew the membership to that club, we weren't just paying for access to a swimming pool. We were paying because we knew that was where all the other people were, and that's where our social lives were centered. And that was what it was going to be. That's where the value comes from. And so it's understanding that's where the value comes from. In terms of how do you monetize it, at the end of the day, there's two people that you can ask for money. One is the members. Do you want access to the space? And there's a million different ways you can do that. It can be a monthly membership. It could be a ticketed events. It can be, but you can ask the members for money. Or you can go find sponsors who are not members, but they want access to the members. I mentioned podcast movement. If Rode microphones, they're not podcasters, they make equipment for podcasters. If they want to show up in front of a bunch of podcasters, they're going to sponsor that conference. Conferences are a great way to think about this, because usually a conference, you charge the tickets for the attendees, but you also charge the sponsors to go be in the exhibit hall and the sponsor booth. And for the sponsors, the value is not just in that exposure, because you can get that exposure through advertising. It's the trust, it's the credibility, it's the ability to be in the same room, in the same space with those right people. So that's how you monetize, and that's what the revenue model is. But it's fundamentally different. The value of community is different than the value of content or audience.
Something that you mentioned before the recording, engineering serendipity.
Yeah. So this is a concept I love. This is not my concept. I learned it from David Spinks, who used to run CMX, and he was the one who introduced me to this. You want that space to be valuable. You want, when people come into that space, people will go, "Oh my gosh, this is great. These are my people. I'm getting so much value out of these connections. I'm going to come back over and over again." What you don't want is to have the experience that you have with Stephen Bartlett, where you're like, "Yeah, I don't need to come back." Right? And so how do you do that? And what makes it valuable for people is when there's serendipity, when they make some sort of connection, a relationship forms, and something valuable springs out of it. I think of it as it's when John Lennon meets Paul McCartney and they say, "Hey, let's go start a band." It's when Steve Wozniak meets Steve Jobs and they go say, "Hey, let's go start a company." It's when two people meet and they say, "Hey, let's go start a family." Whatever it might be. That's serendipity. Those moments where those connections and something blossoms out of it. You can't force serendipity to happen, right? I mean, there's a certain element of luck to it. But you can create conditions in which serendipity is more likely to happen. And when you're designing your space, I think that's what you're doing, is you are going, how can we create conditions under which people are more likely to make connections? There are so many conferences out there, and event producers are starting to realize this. Event producers, I think, especially conference producers, they used to view the value coming from what they put on stage, the content. Oh, we have to get the right keynote speaker, we have to get the right panelists for the panel discussion, and so on and so forth. And then they would go, "Oh, there's 30 minutes between sessions here, we'll just call it networking." We'll call it networking, and hopefully everybody will just figure it out, right? And they didn't, they don't do anything to make sure networking happens other than they call it networking. What we're now finding is that in the age of Google and YouTube and AI, I can get the answers anywhere. I can see that, I don't need to take a couple days off of work and fly across the country to go see Seth Godin speak. That guy's written more books and more podcast interviews and more blog articles than I could ever possibly consume. Again, I'm going to connect with those other people. And so conference producers are starting to realize that, the connection there's a shift. That now people are coming for the connection, and frankly, that's becoming more important than the content in a lot of cases. And so now we've got to take on that responsibility to make sure those connections happen and make sure that they are valuable. And that is engineering serendipity. And it sounds complicated, but it can be really basic. Make sure that whatever background music is playing isn't so loud that people can't talk. Right? That's engineering. I did a podcast series today with Charles Vogel. He has a great book called The Art of Community, and the 7 principles of building community. And we actually go through a lot of these things step by step: the lighting, the music, things like that. One of the things I learned from David Spinks is one of your greatest tools, if you're doing an in-person event, for engineering serendipity, is a name tag. And you can put more information than just the name on the name tag, and you can use that as a way that people can connect with other people and those relationships are going to be valuable to them. So how do we create conditions under which, one thing I hear in the conference and the event production space, and it sounds really, really basic, is chairs. Don't tell people, oh, it's a networking break and there's no place for anybody to sit. All they can do is stand, right? So it's a lot of kind of things like that. And then when you get to online spaces, it's the same thing. It's the same principles. It's just you're designing it online. We're starting to see a lot of AI be used for this. Especially in the virtual event space, where it's, okay, I've got 1,000 people who are showing up to this virtual event. How do we, use AI to connect people who are relevant to each other and increase the chances that there is some sort of serendipity that comes out of it?
Gave me a so great understanding of what events are currently transforming into, because I remember some events that I came to. I got my ticket, I got my badge, and that's it. And then nothing happens. I have to do all the legwork. I have to do everything myself. Nobody tells me, like, there is no community, there is no group, there is no one I can meet. And then I randomly go through thousands of people and trying to catch make some eye contact with someone, and trying to think, or as you said on the badge, I just see their name and that's it. I have no idea who the hell this person is, whether we have something in common and how to talk. And then it's like, just randomly going through on the street and like talking to people and asking like, hey, would you like to talk? What do you do? Etc. And it's so weird. And coming back to this freelance unlock that we created. So what we are trying to do, to your point, so there is a community before the conference. So we do a lot of connections. So we do introductions. We invite people to go and meet people actually before the conference. So they go to the conference already knowing at least one person. And then, this one person knows another person, and they like connect, as you said, engineering serendipity. And it's very, very fun moment when, for example, some people are coming for the third year already. So we've been doing it for 3 years. And then we are so happy to meet them. Like we are like hugging and we're like, hey, I'm so happy to see you. And then people who came for the first time, they're like, what the hell is going on here? And then like, they're like, oh, it's interesting. It looks like they know each other. Oh, it's amazing energy. And they are already getting this energy, even though they just entered through the door and they have no idea what to expect. But even like, when people are seeing each other and like, hey, I know you. Hey, hello, how are you doing? They already feeling this energy. And then it's just yeah.
And I find it so useful to think in terms of real world events when thinking about digital community and finding those analogies. When you're talking about, we make sure that people have met before the event happens and before they in the digital space, we would call that onboarding, right? I mean, that's what it is. And when I describe onboarding and why it's important to people who are not from the digital community space, the analogy I often use is, when you're a freshman and you go to your first year at college or a university, there's something called orientation, which is that, the students usually show up a week early, and it's to meet the other freshmen and the other people who are in the same situation and get that excitement. And, oh, by the way, here's the bathrooms, and that's where you go for your meals and things like that. And that's essentially exactly what onboarding is. And that's so important. I want to highlight a couple of things that you mentioned. First is this is another shift in events. It used to be that we would go to these in-person events and then we would use the internet to keep track, to stay in contact with people afterwards. That has now flipped around. Now people are meeting online first. And the reason they want to go to the in-person event is because they're like, oh, I see this Yurii guy on LinkedIn and we talk all the time and we've been on a podcast together, but I've never met him in person. I'm going to go show up to this event because I get to meet this, we get to meet in person. Event producers are facing a challenge in that people buy their tickets later and later and later. And it's because technology's made it easier, right? I can go book a hotel and a flight at the last minute. I don't have to buy my so they're not making that decision until, the very last minute. And it's freaking event producers out. It is incredibly stressful. And the antidote to that is to build a year-round community around your event. so that you have a group of people who are going to show up, because they already know all and are interacting with these people online, and now they want to meet them in person. And that is the shift. That's the business model shift. Our conference used to be about, hey, we're going to put a bunch of great speakers on stage and we're going to have really great content, and that's where the value of our event comes from. To now the value of our event comes from, hey, there's connections with other people and you're connected to these people year round digitally, but you want to go see them. That's the difference between, that's what community revenue is that new business model and where that value comes from.
Seth, I feel like we just opened the whole rabbit hole of the events, of connections, of community, and I still have so many questions, and I really would like to have the sky as the limit, but time is the limit to our conversation. So first of all, we'll definitely have a second episode where we'll dive deeper into the events, community connection, and how to create this experience. And for now, the final question. So what are, from your experience, 3 key ingredients to engineer this serendipity?
Yeah. Number one, like we talked about, really understand the reason your people are coming together. And I distinguish between the shared mission of your community members and the organizational value of the community. The shared mission is why they show up over and over again. The organizational value is why you're doing it. Those two things can intersect, can overlap, they should intersect, but they're not the same thing, right? If you are running a conference, you're doing it because you're making money off of it. The attendees don't care whether you make money off of it. They're coming because they're looking. So understand that, and understand that, like I said, it's not just in your head. It's not just you can think about it, but that's a working theory. Right? You need to go out and test it, and you need to test it, in these small events as experiments and go, oh yeah, okay, I was right. People really do want to show up for this, or, oh no, it turns out nobody cares. Right? So number one, understand why people are showing up and what the value is, in that. I think that's the first thing you need for community. Number two, you've got to design your space for this. Whether it's an online space, whether it's an in-person space, you've got to design it. And something that I find useful when talking about events, and then this also applies to digital, not all events are designed to build community. Some events are designed to build audience. As an example, if you go to see a movie in a movie theater, that is designed to put that movie in front of as many people as possible. That is designed for audience. And you are literally told before the movie starts, don't you dare talk to the guy next to you, because if you do, we will kick you out. Movies do not build community, right? If you want to know whether an event is building community or building audience, as a general rule of thumb, look at the chairs, look at the seats. If the seats are all pointed in one direction, they're pointed towards a stage or a screen, chances are you are building audience. And if they're pointed to each other, they're gathered around a coffee table or, a campfire, chances are you are building community. And you can have events that do both. You can have a conference where there's panels and keynote speakers, but then there's opportunities for people to, this is why I love brain dates, if you're familiar with them, which is kind of this bolt-on service to communities that are these roundtable discussions that, it's in the name, roundtable, right? The chairs are pointed at each other, and it allows you to build community. If you're doing, I come from radio broadcasting. Radio, when they hear events, they think concerts. And most concerts don't build community, because when you're screaming at the band on stage, you're not talking to the guy next to you. The concerts that build community have some sort of component, whether it's you're tailgating beforehand and there's a party, or it's something like one of those concerts where you go out and you camp in the desert for a week, and that, that's when the community building is happening, when you're out there in the desert, not when the bands are on stage. So that's the second thing is, I think design, and when you're thinking about the online space, it's the same thing. Webinars or movies, basically, right? It's not the same thing as using Zoom webinar is not the same thing as using a platform like Remo, which I mentioned before, which is designed for people to connect with each other. Are you creating your space as just content distribution, or is it designed, are the chairs pointed at each other in your digital space, so to speak? So that would be the second one. Number one, understand why people are coming together. Number two, design your space for it. And I think number three, if you want to monetize this, if you want community to be the product and the thing that generates revenue, and not just support some other product or service that you offer, and that's the community revenue model. I think you want to really understand where the value comes from, and understand how that works and why people find it valuable, and really dial that in. What are people getting out of that, and how can we, sometimes I get pushback on whether you should be allowed to charge for that. People are like, well, everybody needs community, so we shouldn't charge for it. I reject that. Everybody needs food. Nobody's saying we shouldn't pay farmers. In fact, because everybody needs food, maybe we should pay farmers. Maybe it's really important that we pay farmers and chefs and grocery store clerks, because this is really important, something everybody needs. If everybody needs community, and high quality community is really important, and we know that it is because the World Health Organization is, and the former Surgeon General of the United States and folks like Robert Putnam have long made the case for why this is really important, then yeah, we should devote resources to it. And so it starts with understanding where the value is, how you create that value, and how you make that revenue model work. So make sure you understand that.
Yeah, it's amazing. I totally feel everything that you are talking about. And I even like when you are talking about the value and understanding your members, I was like, it's like the basics, you can't just go without it. But then when I talk to different people who have no idea what community is, or even to some community members, they still focus on engagement. They still focus on number of messages in their community space. Like, why? Why do you do this? Like, what's the value? Like, what's in it for them? Do you know the answer for what's in it for them? And I had so many fun conversations with people. Like, they tell me like, oh, I'm struggling with engagement. I'm like, why? Yeah, because we want people to be engaged. And I'm like, why? Like, what's in it for them? Have you asked them actually what's in it for them? Oh, no, I didn't talk to them. Like, okay. So go talk to them. Go ask this question.
Yeah. Well, and this is why I like making community the product, because you're going to know whether there's value there, right? And the value might be different for different people. Like I mentioned the swim club that I was on as a kid. I showed up to that swim club 3, 4, 5 times a week, which is why my parents paid the dues. There were some people who were members of that club who maybe only showed up twice a month, but they paid the dues. They were still finding the value in it. The value for them may have been different than the value for me, and but they were both, there was a price tag on it, and both of us said yes, that's worth the price. And so it's a test, and so and so is the metric how many times a week does each swim club member show up? It's somewhat useful, but is it the be all and end all? No, the be all and end all is, do they pay the dues? And if they do,
Exactly.
Great, we're doing a good job. And if they don't, something's got to change.
To keep the conversation going, name 2 people I should reach out to talk about community as a business, community as a product, and community ROI.
Oh gosh, there are so many. There are so many folks in the enterprise space that and enterprise can be a little bit different than what I'm doing. I mean, some of it applies, some of it doesn't. But like Richard Millington, somebody that I follow a lot, Brian Oblinger, those folks. I am in the Community Consultants Collective, and there's a lot of great people. This is something that Todd Nilsson put together. I'm a big fan of Bree Lever, and Bree is doing something a little bit more like I am doing. She's not necessarily on the enterprise ends of things. She runs Ember Consulting. I think she's brilliant and doing fantastic stuff. There's a lot of folks out there.
The best part is that I know all those people, and
I know, right?
a little bit of spoiler. Todd will be the next guest, so I'm speaking to him
Oh,
tomorrow.
Todd is fantastic. Todd is fun. Catherine Hackney, who is in the Community Consultants Collective, who works a lot with trade associations. I mean, I think
Yeah,
she's brilliant and fantastic. Francisco, who puts together all these community-led events. I mean, there are a lot of, and then there's folks who I'm sure you know of who like you said, I've seen them in my orbit and I've seen them on LinkedIn, and I haven't had an opportunity to meet them in person yet. I will mention, if you're interested in media or events in particular, I will mention two people who are not community experts,
yeah, yeah.
but whose work I think intersects. One is Julius Solaris. And Julius Solaris, follow him on LinkedIn. He runs Bold Push, and he is an event strategist. He is talking, I think, primarily to conference producers and festival producers. You know, he's looking at things like South by Southwest or the Cannes Film Festival that just, I guess it's, I don't even know if it's just a film festival anymore, you know, but he's looking at that. But he is one of the people who is outside of community, and yet he is often talking about what we've been talking about here, which is that the value comes from the connections that people are making. And so it's really interesting to see somebody connect community concepts. The other one is Evan Shapiro. And Evan Shapiro is a former television executive who rebranded himself as a media cartographer. He comes from the world of television, and he puts a lot of data together. But it talks a lot about, you know, I mean, so often when I talk about community, I'm positioning it in relation to content and in relation to audience, and he's very much in that space and looking at what is happening to audiences and how that's changing and that's shifting, and I have found him very, very insightful. So these are two folks that are outside of the community space.
Amazing. Yeah, Seth, thank you so much. First of all, I feel it is deep in my heart that community, events, human connections, it's all intersected. You cannot create community without events. It's hard to create event without, you can create event without community, but like, it's moving as
Events are how
about.
we created community before the internet existed.
Yeah, exactly.
By
So
the, you know, it turns out there was community long before the internet.
no way. But yeah, I feel like if you will talk to younger generations, they won't believe you. I still believe you, so I get it. And yeah, you know, you are so passionate about like making it work, about making this human connection, about engineering the serendipity, about ensuring that people are not brought in one space just to be there and maybe pay for it, but to exactly get the value, to exactly talk to each other, to exactly make these human connections, and to, I don't know, like just make the world a better place. So thank you so much for this conversation, so much inspiration, and yeah, I'm super happy that we made it.
Oh, thank you for having me on. I'm so glad we finally did it.
And yeah, see you in the community world. And thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions about how the community can help you reach and overcome your business goals faster, let's connect on LinkedIn and talk about it. That's it. We're done. See you in the next episode.